Good evening, guys, and welcome back to another video with me, Jordan Blake, as always. I obviously did my championship prediction reaction video last week. If you haven't already checked that out, make sure you go and do so. Some absolute stinkers in there. This is going to be exactly the same thing, just this time we're going to be doing it for my Premier League predictions. So the premise is the same. We're going to go up the list of the table position by position, and then we're going to look at where the team I predicted to come in that position actually came. Get a point for every position I am out, and then the lower the points I get at the end, the better. Just as an FYI, in the championship I had 102 points, so it's pretty bad. But I'm hoping this will be better. Obviously the Premier League, there's less teams, but that does mean that if a team is particularly out of position, then that is going to be punished. So, let's just get into it. There's not much more to say, really. Let's just have a look and see how well I did. As a side note, just got to say that as of today, which is the 4th of June, Errol Bullitt has signed a new deal with Cardiff City. So, hallelujah, the club has finally finalised the deal to keep Errol at the club. Cardiff do have a manager now. Despite this, we're still fourth favourites to go down, or joint fourth favourites to go down. Not sure where the bookies get their information from, but we're not going down.
Are you sure about that?
So in 20th place, as everyone can imagine, the team I had in 20th place was Sheffield United, and as was pretty much proven by a lot of people's predictions, that was an absolute bang-on prediction. They were pretty much everyone's pre-season favourites to go down as the bottom team. The team I have in 19th, I think a lot of people did also think would have a torrid time and maybe finish bottom, but I didn't fall into that much of a trap. We will see who that team is, and we can have a little laugh. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. But yeah, Sheffield United, I mean, they were good in the championship last season. I think looking back to the fact that they finished second to Burnley last season, maybe, I wouldn't say it was a false position. I think they were a good team last year. But the players that they lost, Sanderberg, Undai, the players that they lost basically were too good too good for them to replace. Despite the fact that they were players for them in the championship last season, not in the Prem. But yeah, basically not good enough replacements. They were always going to struggle. They were historically bad if you exclude the points that Derby accumulated. But from a defensive standpoint, I think they had the most goals conceded in Premier League history. So, yeah, historically bad team. We're never going to do anything. Change the manager. Chris Wilder didn't really change anything. I would argue that he might have been better under Paul Heckingbottom. And I don't really rate Paul Heckingbottom, if I'm honest, either. But, yeah, 20th place. I got it bang on. As with the championship video from last week, I'm going to rate on a red or a green based on if I think it's a good or a bad prediction. I got it bang on. So, 0 points. Good start. Green. Let's move on to the next team. So next up, I had Wolves. And, of course, they did a lot better than people give them credit for, I think. I do have to say I made this prediction before Gary O'Neill took the job. So, hindsight is a wonderful thing. I'm going to have to put it down as a red, as a bad prediction. Putting someone to be relegated, as with the championship video last week, putting someone to be relegated if they stay in the league is a bad prediction. But I think at the time I did the prediction, pre-Gary O'Neill, everything up in the air with the club, the players that they'd lost, you think of someone like Matheus Nunes goes to City and they replace him with Tommy Doyle. Now, Tommy Doyle had been on loan at Cardiff City a couple of seasons ago. He's a superb player. Did really well for Sheffield United last year in the Championship. But I just never thought he would be of that ilk. Now, you could argue that Matheus Nunes had a worse season than Tommy Doyle, potentially. I know, obviously, he's won the Premier League with City, but did he really have an influence on that side? It's hard to argue that he did. And Tommy Doyle's had a big influence on the Wolves team, so much so that they are making that deal permanent, I believe. So, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Gary O'Neill's done a wonderful job. You know, he did a good job with Bournemouth. I remember bigging up Bournemouth to my friends at the start of the year, saying they're going to be really good. I'd heard a lot about like the signings they were making, and Iraola was really highly rated. That was deemed to be true as well. Like, Bournemouth had a really good season. I think they made the right decision moving on from Gary O'Neill, but Gary O'Neill's proven his doubters wrong yet again this season with Wolves, finishing in 14th place. Really solid season, and yeah, it's a pretty bad one from me. So in 18th place, I had Luton Town, and of course, Luton Town did in fact finish in 18th place. So that is another slap bang on prediction. And in my head, thinking back to these predictions from the start of the year, later on in the season, in my head, I knew that I had bigged Luton up to an extent. So I think having them in 18th is somewhat of a shout out to Rob Edwards and Luton Town. Probably not as much as I thought in my head. I kind of thought that I had them above Burnley and a team that were going to stay in the league. Clearly that isn't true, because I had them in 18th place and Burnley are not yet seen. But I knew that people were going to underestimate Rob Edwards and Luton Town. I saw them last year. They were a really good team when he came in. I actually think they played really good football. There seems to be this consensus going around. I don't know what the actual statistics are behind the way they played, but from the eye test, I feel like they play really good football for a promoted side, especially one with the resources that Luton have had. Like, obviously, players like Sammy Lokonga had a really big influence. Ted Mengi had a really big influence, and Ross Barkley had a really big influence. Like, these being like Premier League based players, not so much Premier League minutes with like Sammy Lokonga and Ted Mengi, but Premier League grown or owned players influencing the Luton side a lot. But they were, resources wise, Sheffield United basically the only team that've done less than them in the market to get to where they were in the Prem. Alfie Doughty was a revelation, and he's another player that Cardiff had on loan a couple of seasons ago and was superb for us in a short space of time. He's gone on to do amazing things. I wouldn't have never have said that he would have got to the level that he's got to with Luton, and there's potential for him to stay in the Premier League going forward. I think it's someone like a Brentford or a Crystal Palace, he could be a really good player for them. But I predicted Luton to finish 18th. They played really good football, in my opinion. But yeah, I predicted them to finish 18th. They finished 18th. At the moment, it's not looking too bad. But there are some worse ones to come, of course. On to the next. So then in 17th place, I had Burnley. Now, people were waxing lyrical about Burnley going into the season. I have to admit, I think most of the people waxing lyrical were Premier League pundits and YouTubers. I think it's not a slate on them at all. I watch more Championship football than I do Premier League football. So on a player-to-player basis, I would know more about like Championship players than I do Premier League players. But I think everyone knows a lot about the Prem just with the media coverage that it gets. I think I mentioned that in my video last week too. Burnley were a superb, record-breaking to an extent, like Championship team. They had over 100 points. They were pressing. They were possession-based. They were amazing. But that was never going to translate to the Premier League. You look at teams like Scott Parker's teams that have been promoted in the past. They never translate well to the Prem because they always try and dominate games in the Championship, and then they get to the Prem and it's not the same. Burnley did figure out, towards the end of the season that they had to change their style slightly. It did bring some success. They went on a bit of a run towards the end of the season where they lost less games. Then they did finish with 3 losses to end the season, which obviously stopped them getting anywhere near the safety point that they wanted to get to. They did threaten it slightly when Forest went through a little bad patch. Forest ended up doing just enough. Same with Luton. Like, Luton had a very good opportunity at one point with Forest's deductions, but ended up losing to Forest and ended up, falling 6 points short in the end. So, both these teams, they gave it a much better go than obviously Sheffield United did. I think the 3 teams that came up this year were some of the weaker promoted teams in recent history. Probably weaker than the 3 teams that are coming up from the Championship going into next season for sure. But Burnley had a go. I thought they'd finish 17th. They finished in 19th, so it's a -2. Again, it's going to be a red bad prediction from myself, because anytime you predict a team to finish in the bottom 3 and they don't, or vice versa, it's got to be a bad prediction. So that's a bad one on my part once more, but not too far out. So at the moment we're on 7 points after 4 teams. It's okay. It's okay. And let's move on to the next. In 16th, I had Fulham. Now, Fulham's an interesting one. I mean, there's several teams in this little part of the table that are pretty much, it's kind of irrelevant where they finish. You know, there's nothing to gain or lose by being where they are. It basically depends if they were ever in a relegation scrap, I guess. Fulham were never in a relegation scrap this season. I felt like they were always just safe, but never going to trouble the top 8 either. I thought 16th might seem a bit harsh, but I thought, you know, losing Mitrovic, I thought they were going to be a lot weaker than they were last year. Turns out they weren't actually that much worse. Like, yes, they finished lower down, they had less points and everything, less goals, but Rodrigo Muniz had a really good sort of flourishing end of the season. He looks like a good player. They still do a lot with the players they've got. You think of like Andreas Pereira, who was at United, felt like a level way below United in 2 seasons now in the Prem. With Fulham, he's done a really good job. Willian, who's like 38 or 37, like doing a good job for them. They still get minutes, and a lot of minutes out of people like Tom Cairney, who's, you know, probably like 32, 33 now. Really a championship player. So, once again, Marco Silva's done a great job. I did them a bit of a disservice pulling them in 16th because they actually finished in 13th. So, it's a 3 difference. I think I'm not gonna say it's a bad prediction. It's safely mid-table. 16th, you could say maybe I predicted them to be in a bit more trouble than they were. I personally just thought that the bottom 3 teams were going to be like far and away the bottom 3 teams, and the teams above would not be worried. You know, Burnley I thought maybe would be in that relegation struggle, but stay up. They didn't because of Wolves getting Gary O'Neill basically. But Fulham were always in mid-table. They were never threatened by relegation. 47 points. It's not a bad season, but it's an okay prediction, I think. I'm not waxing lyrical about myself too much there. But yeah, Fulham mid-table safely. On to the next team. So next of all, 15th place, we have Everton, and once again, Everton are a team I've predicted to be bang on the position they finished, 15th place. Now, I probably thought it'd be a little bit. I was about to say I thought it'd be a bit more easy for them in finishing 15th. I didn't think they'd be in any threat of relegation whatsoever. Obviously, it transpired that they were in threat of relegation, but that is purely down to the points deduction that you received. If you look at the points that they gathered over the season, they got 40 points, which is always the magic number for the Premier League safety. I mean, it's 14 points above the relegation zone this season. Without the deductions, I think they would have been on 48 anyway, which would have been, 13th place in the Prem. They had one of the best defensive records in the Prem. They only conceded 51 goals, which for a side finishing in that low down the table is actually pretty good. They got less goals conceded than Manchester United. Sean Dyche has done a superb job there under everything that's happening around him. Like, they've got some really good players, of course. Everyone wants Andre Onana, everyone wants Jared Branthwaite, but there's still a limited resource squad. There's still a limited resource quality of team, and they've done a superb job to finish where they did. Basically, solid mid-table season from them. Never in threat of relegation. If you take aside the points deductions, and then if you look at the actual points finished at the end of the season, and they finished 12 points above, 14 points above relegation. They were never really in threat of relegation, even with the deduction. So, super solid season from Everton, just what they needed, really. Relegation would be horrendous for them. That's not happened, and I predicted them to finish 15th. That's where they finished, so another good prediction from me on that one. In 14th, I had Bournemouth. Now, Bournemouth actually finished in 12th, so again, it's a very, middling, mid-table, team that I thought would just be safe. I'm going to say it's another good prediction. I thought Bournemouth would be a mid-table team. I didn't think they'd have any struggles. I was really, really interested to see how well Iraola did in his first season in charge of Bournemouth. They brought in some really interesting players. Like, if you listen to people who, regularly look into football, they were all waxing lyrical about like the things that Bournemouth were doing, the players they brought in, particularly people like Milos Kerkesh, and of course I already well knew about Alex Scott from the Championship. So Bournemouth are always going to be an interesting one to watch. I thought I went safe kind of with a 14th place. They actually finished in 12th, but as I say, I'm going to give myself, it's only a 2 out, it's in the mid-table. I think that's fine. That's a green in my eyes. So yeah, Bournemouth, not much to say really. Dominic Solanke was amazing this season. They played really good football, progressive football. Iraola signed a new deal now. I think they're going to be a really good team to watch for the next couple of seasons. I think they could be a team that push towards the lower end of European football. I really do. With the right signings, they're ambitious. Yeah, I'm really excited about what Bournemouth do. And I had them just outside of where they finished. I think that's a good prediction. Just going to say, guys, you might notice this has moved around a little bit. I noticed halfway through that I was put in the position on the point scored against where they finished, not where they were predicted, which is wrong. It should be, positionally from where I said, not from where they finished. So that's changed, but now it's all correct. So as we go forward, it'll continue going in the right manner. Let's get on with the next prediction. So in 13th place, I had Nottingham Forest. Bit of a bad one. Obviously, Nottingham Forest really, really did flirt with relegation. They actually finished in 17th place. They had a 4-point deduction, which was rescinded obviously from 6. But yeah, they finished in 17th. They were really poor. I think maybe a slight bias towards Steve Cooper because I think he's a really good manager, and I'm not a big fan of Nuno. I think they would have been better off with Steve Cooper. Not to say that his football was, good, but he had more chance with the players. I think Forest have stayed up in the end purely through the other teams being below them being so poor. And I'd be worried about going into the future with Nuno because Forest obviously can't spend money. They're potentially going to lose Owen. They're potentially going to lose Morgan Gibbs-White, and that's already after losing Brennan Johnson last season. There's potential for it to be a disastrous scenario to be in next season. Obviously, Leicester coming up have got a points deduction to deal with, so who knows how difficult it'll be for them. But yeah, basically, Nottingham Forest, I predicted 13th. They finished 17th, so it's not a bad one in terms of I predicted them to do better than they did. But I think being 4 places out in the mid-table, again, I thought they'd be well clear of relegation. They ended up being close to it, so I'm going to have to give myself a negative mark on that one. In 12th place, I had Crystal Palace. Now, Palace is an interesting one. I think if the season had been seen out with Roy, do I think they ever would have gone down? No, I don't. I think they're well better than the teams that did go down. But would they have finished anywhere near 12th without Oliver Glasner? No, as well. So in the end, it was only 49 points, which shows how close the bottom end of the table ended up being. Because we're looking at a team like Bournemouth and saying they've had a really good year. They finished 1 point behind Palace. Like Palace went on such a good run towards the end of the season. It's not even the way he kind of unleashed Eze and Michael Olise towards the end of the season. They were available for him, which helped because Roy had a lot of time throughout the season where they weren't available, especially Michael Olise. But you look at the way he got Mateta scoring goals, and it was a superb end to the season with him, and I think Palace fans should be really excited about going forward with him. There's obviously the chance that they lose Olise in particular, maybe Eze too, but if they lose one, I'm not sure they're ever going to let the other one go. Yeah, really mixed season for Palace. I predicted them 12th. They finished 10th. Obviously, bit of an interesting take to say whether it's good or bad. I think it's a good prediction. They finished 2 places better than I predicted. But but peaks and troughs of a season don't indicate like the difference that could have been. Like I think with Roy in charge throughout the season, I would have ended up having a prediction where maybe I had Palace in 12th and they end up finishing 16th perhaps, and they've ended up finishing 10th. So Glasnow's media really made me look better than I probably did predict Palace to be. But it works both ways, you know. Things that go bad in the season that make your prediction a lot worse down the table. It's all relative. So yeah, pretty happy with that one. And so far I'm doing really well. But there's some interesting positions to come. As you can see, 16th place hasn't been filled yet. So in 11th place, I had West Ham. Now, I thought maybe after the Conference League final win, losing Declan Rice, I thought maybe there'd be a bit of a hangover, there'd be a bit of a drop-off from last season. I mean, in the league last season, they were really poor anyway, but they did win the Conference League. As is the situation now, where Moyes has left and Lopetegui has taken over, there clearly was a need to change. I think it's kind of better the devil you know. Like, I think I'm very much of the opinion that West Ham fans perhaps should have been more appreciative of Moyes. They finished top 10 in 3 out of 4 seasons, I believe. The only season not finishing top 10 was them winning the Conference League last year. So what more can you really ask for as a West Ham fan, you know? I understand it from a footballing standpoint. They lost Declan Rice. They replaced him with Alvarez. They replaced him with Kudus, and they've been really good in certain aspects. Antonio needs replacing, but O&E from Forest would be a perfect replacement for him. That could be quite an easy deal to make. It depends what Lopetegui wants to do. Maybe there wasn't a fair reflection of his football at Wolves either with the resources they had. So, yeah, you know, I predicted them 11th. They finished 9th. I think it's another decent prediction. So, yeah, we're going to give myself another green for that, I think. Maybe I'm being too nice to myself this time. But yeah, West Ham, I said 11th. They finished in 9th. On to the next. So, there's a run of a few stinky ones now, and the first stinky one is Brentford. I thought Brentford would finish in 10th. In hindsight, I'm not sure why. I mean, they were missing Tony until January. Like, where did I think the goals were coming from? In fairness to me, the start of the season, Wissa and Mbeumo were doing superb. Obviously, Mbeumo got injured, and Kevin Schade never really hit the ground running there either, so the goals were not there. With Thomas Frank being the manager, superb manager, obviously being linked with big jobs now, despite the fact that they finished in 16th, which, you know, is... Sorry, I've done that again, haven't I? I just realised. This is the thing, guys, you know? You see the ins and outs with me. No airs and graces. But yeah, Brentford, you know, they finished 16th, which is really poor. A poor season for them. It's poor for my prediction too. Because they've ended up being 6 places lower than I thought. It's obviously a bad prediction. And I think they'll be a lot better next season. The underlying numbers for Brentford are still very good. But 16th is a poor result for them. And they've ended up finishing lower than Everton with an 8-point deduction. I'm not sure many people would have had Everton above Brentford at the start of the season. So that says a lot. I think with a full season with Tony, if he stays there, if they end up losing Tony and Mbeumo, ominous. But I still back Thomas Frank. On to the next. So I said there's a couple of stinkers coming up. I had Tottenham Hotspur in 9th. They've actually ended up finishing in 5th. Now, no matter what you say, this anyway you spin it, this is a bad result in terms of my prediction. You know, they finished 4 places above where I thought they would. It's a bad prediction from me. I think a lot of people did think Spurs would suffer a little bit with Harry Kane and with Ange's first season this year. I think it's more a case of overestimating other teams above them than maybe underestimating Spurs. there's definitely a case of both. Having Spurs in ninth is ludicrous looking back. But if you see the teams above them and with their pre-season goodwill, I guess, a good feeling going into the season, the fact that Spurs lost Kane and they had a new manager who's going to be really open football, I think if you look at the teams that I've got above, maybe there'll be some slack to give. But yeah, Spurs in ninth, bad prediction. They've been superb this year. Yeah, on to the next. So again, going back to what I said, with Spurs like in eighth, they have Brighton. Brighton actually finished in 11th, so they actually finished 3 places lower than I predicted. So it's a -3, and I'm gonna say it's a bad prediction. As I said with Spurs, I think Spurs were going into the season losing their best player, changing manager. They didn't really bring any big names in. Like, they've made some good signings, particularly Van der Ven and Vicario. They've both been superb signings. But I just thought Brighton, on the back of a really good season last year, would continue to be just there and thereabouts in 8th. Obviously, Europa League football would have influenced them a little bit, but I thought they'd still be there or thereabouts. But the amount of injuries they had, the losing of Caicedo, McAllister, it really hindered them. Obviously, Roberto De Zerbi's now left too. But yeah, I thought they'd be a lot better than they were. It's only 3 positions out. It's actually, they were a long way off finishing in 8th place. But yeah, I thought they'd still be there or thereabouts. They've ended up finishing in 11th, so it's not the best prediction. But yeah, on to 7th place. So in 7th, I had Villa. Now, obviously, based on the back of last season, it would have been not so bold to predict Villa to finish 7th. I think a lot of people had them. It's going to be a red as well. I think a lot of people had them to finish between 5th and 8th. I think a lot of people would have had Villa in between 5th and 8th. It was basically in my head. It was basically like Villa, Newcastle, and Brighton. Like, who's gonna finish top of that little table? I got Villa in 7th, which could be a bit of an indicator too. I got in 6th, but I put Villa in 7th. I just thought Unai Emery's an amazing manager, but I just probably overestimated the teams I've got above Villa. Obviously, a team like Newcastle, they've really struggled with injuries as well, so that's probably why they've not finished as high up as they could have. Particularly centre-back wise, like Botman and Lascelles, Shaw at times. But yeah, Villa, what an amazing season they had. Ollie Watkins, potentially player of the year for me. I know Foden won it. Foden's been superb. Cole Palmer was superb. But I think Ollie Watkins was amazing. Something like 13 assists with 19, 20 goals. Like, what a season. And Villa obviously finished 4th. Champions League football for them. Absolutely incredible. And yeah, amazing season from the Villains. And not a very good prediction from me. Like, predicting a team to finish 7th when they get Champions League football it's like predicting someone to get relegated when they don't, or vice versa. On to 6th place, which you can already probably guess, is Newcastle United. Yes, I thought of that little mini league between Brighton, Newcastle, and Villa, I thought Newcastle would finish top of it. They've ended up finishing in 7th, so I don't think it's a bad prediction. The only thing that really goes against me in this scenario is the fact that they've not got European football through United finishing as FA Cup winners. In reality, Newcastle would have got Conference League football. I predicted them to get Europa League football. There's not much of a difference. There was one position. It's still the lower end of European football, so I don't think it's like not predicting a team to get Champions League football if they do, like with Villa. So I'm not going to be too harsh on myself. I'm going to say it's a good prediction, but yeah, injuries hampered them so much, and they're only missing out on European football because Manchester United won the FA Cup. So yeah, not a bad prediction. I thought there'd be a bit of a drop off. Like, they finished in 4th last season. They've ended up finishing in 7th. I predicted them 6th. I think that's a pretty fair prediction and not a bad one. Yeah, on to 5th. So in 5th place, I predicted Chelsea. Chelsea actually finished in 6th, so not bad again. I predicted them to finish as a Europa League team, and they are indeed finishing as a Europa League team. So I'm going to say that's a good prediction. I think that's pretty fair. They won all 5 of the last 5 of the season, so that really helped them get up the table to get above Manchester United and Newcastle. There was a time where they looked like they might even finish in the bottom half. Incredibly, after the money they spent, I think towards the end of the season they really started to play more consistently. Not necessarily better. I think the underlying numbers suggest that they've been as good all season. It was just that they were getting a bit unlucky towards the start of the season. They got better throughout the end of the season. But players like Caicedo, for sure, really started to improve back to his Brighton self towards the end of the season. Palmer was obviously a revelation and is a big part of why they got to where they got to. They scored a lot of goals. They just conceded a lot of goals too. But yeah, I was going to say they're bright for the future, but then obviously they've got rid of Pochettino. I'm not sure Maresca's going to work. It's more of a long-term view. I think the Chelsea board look at people that have worked for Pep. They look at like an Arteta mould. And although Arteta went straight from being an assistant to being an Arsenal manager, I think, and Maresca's obviously works at Leicester, I think that they think that he's just going to translate that football to Chelsea. It's not necessarily going to work like that. I have reservations, but we'll see what happens in the summer. We'll see where I predict them to finish come August. In 4th place, I predicted Liverpool. Now, obviously, Liverpool have finished in 3rd in the end. Again, I predict them to be a Champions League side. They are a Champions League side. I'm going to say it's good. You could say there are technicalities around whether you think maybe being a 4th place team, they would have been a way off. But it's all hearsay. In the end of the season, they finished 7 points off Arsenal even, so there was a big drop off the end of the year. You look at the form of the top 2 sides, they both won every one of their games going in towards the last game of the season to get to the position to potentially win. Liverpool's form was woeful for the last 5. A loss, 2 draws and 2 wins. It's really poor. They crumbled at the end. I don't think anyone really predicted them to be where they were. I predicted them to finish 4th. I didn't think they'd be anywhere near the title. They've ended up putting up a really good fight. One less loss than City, and the City lost the least in the league. So, yeah, I think it's an okay prediction. Champions League football, which I said, but they put up much more of a fight than anyone thought they would, and yeah, it's a good prediction. It's a good prediction. Unlike predicted Manchester United to finish 3rd.
Really?
Which, it's not been mentioned on this channel at all. People who know me will know, but I was a United fan. Kind of still have an affiliation for them, slightly. I was a United fan for a long time. Maybe a slight bias, but I think they finished 3rd last season. They improved with some signings. Like, who could have predicted Mason Mount would miss the entire season? Onana in goal. Everyone thought I thought it was gonna transform the way they could play football from the back, and they won a cup last year. They've won an FA Cup this year. Like, it was perhaps blind optimism, but I think Liverpool were much better than anyone thought. I think Villa were obviously much better than anyone thought. I think Newcastle and Chelsea had a really tough run in the season. Spurs were better than anyone thought, and then United were much, 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 much more poor than anyone thought. Having said that, maybe it was a stupid prediction to finish in 3rd anyway. And of course, now it looks horrendously bad. This one I'm going to have to take on the chin and say, yeah, okay, I got that really badly wrong. And I will not be making the same mistake with Manchester United going into the next season unless I truly believe that they will be better than a safe option to say for them would be. But as of this moment, we don't even know if they're going to be continuing with Erik ten Hag, so there's always that. Either way, Manchester United finished 5 positions worse off than I thought they would, and I thought they'd be a Champions League team. They're actually going to be a Europa League team just because of winning the FA Cup, so yeah, there is that. And then Arsenal, I predicted finish 2nd, and of course that means that I predicted Manchester City to win the league. So I've got the top two bang on. I think, you know, most people probably would have done the same. I think we saw a really strong Arsenal season last year. It's always bold to go against City. I think if anyone had gone for Arsenal, I would have understood. They strengthened with Declan Rice. They strengthened with Kai Havertz. There was obviously a lot to say about Kai Havertz, whether he was going to be a good signing, where he fit in. He ended up being a really good player for them. I actually rate the way that he's been integrated into that side by Arteta a lot. And obviously Declan Rice was a revelation. He's superb. Jurriën Timber would have been another superb player for them. I think he would have played a lot of left back this season. He's ended up missing the entire season, so that didn't really help. But Declan Rice in particular, transformational signing. They probably do need a DM to allow him to play as an 8 if that's what they want to do, or that's what people seem to say though. But I like Kai Havertz as the false 9 with Ødegaard playing behind, and Ødegaard's been superb too. But yeah, it was a pretty easy prediction, I think, to say. I think the only case you would have made is maybe they would have been a drop off after the disappointment of crumbling at the end of last season, but they've actually come back stronger. Finished with the same points the City used to win the league last year. This time they've fallen short. And then obviously Manchester City, what is it to say about them other than they're inevitable? I mean, genuinely. Please.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Either way, I don't think I've done too badly. I don't know if you remember me saying last week, but I think Spencer Owen, who I got this point system from, I think his best result is 44. He didn't improve on that this year. I've seen his reaction video to his predictions. He didn't improve on 44. I think he had more like 80 something. So I'm going to tot up what I got, and we're going to see, and then there'll be a reaction to that. So guys, you can do the math yourself if you want to be sure, but I can assure you, I've double checked, I've triple checked, it's correct. Funny that I mentioned that Spencer's best was ever 44, because just so happens that my first time doing a point system on my Premier League predictions, I have also got 44. Now, if you think about that, I was only 44 positions out across the league, team by team. You know what? I think I've done really, really well. They like in as much as that Wolves were 5 out, Brentford were 6 out, United were 5 out. Other than that, I've done really well. Like, really well. I'm so happy. This has made my week. Anyway, guys, if you did enjoy that, please be sure to like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and I could really do with the support. I'll be back later on in the year with my predictions for the Prem and for the Championship. And I'll be back with another video very soon. So, you know, what are you waiting for? Just go and do it. Anyway.